working on Surah Al-An'am for 101 days. It's a very long time. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're actually going to be talking about the tafsir, but there were a couple items as I was going over our last class, and I thought that we needed to further elaborate on it. Number one is basically we left off talking about the ruling on eating rabbits or bunnies. And one couple, well, not one couple, that's an oxymoron, but a couple things to say in regards to that. We said the first one, that there is a narration upon Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As that he had said that it was forbidden, and Ibn Abi Layla basically said it was hated. And Abdullah ibn Amr, he basically mentioned a story that a rabbit was brought to the Prophet ﷺ, and he did not eat it, and he did not forbid from eating it, and that he had claimed that it menstruates. But here's one thing, after going over in regards to do rabbits actually menstruate and all of that, it turned out that rabbits don't actually menstruate. And when that does happen, they basically have induced ovulators. So it's not a menstrual cycle per se, but it basically would release the egg only to ovulate when they mate. They do not bleed monthly. And in the situation where there may be some kind of a vaginal bleeding for a rabbit, that would either be an infection or a cancer or an injury or a urinary tract issue that needs, I guess a medical or at least a vet involvement right there, but they do not have a menstrual cycle. So, but at the same time, even though, yes, we said that they do not have a menstrual cycle, at least like human beings, but still at the end of the day is that, they had basically based it on their own, I guess it was an anecdotal, it was their own experience, and they basically thought that it was menstruating. Perhaps they had seen a bunny or a rabbit basically have some kind of a bleeding, and they thought that that was menstrual bleeding. Regardless, of course, this hadith was narrated by Abu Dawood, but we did say, let's close that one, we did say that this hadith is actually not authentic. So this particular hadith that we were basically going over, see, number one, he said that, well, this is the number, the hadith number, but just because you have a hadith number, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's an authentic hadith. And then we did a little research right there, and we basically found that there is a weak, or at least an anonymous narrator, making that hadith actually not contain the at least the prerequisites of an authentic hadith. And that wasn't just mentioned by this scholar, but that was also mentioned by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who also said the chain of narration is a weak chain of narration. So the other part that I wanted to comment on right there, so we had seen that there is another hadith that that the Prophet ﷺ was brought basically a barbecued rabbit that a man had caught, and then he said, that is basically the man, he tells the Prophet ﷺ, I had seen some bleeding on it. So the Prophet ﷺ was disgusted. So again, the Prophet ﷺ was not the one in this narration saying that the rabbits were menstruating, but the man came and basically shared his experience and what he had seen, and told him that, well, I had seen that there was some blood coming out of it, and the Prophet ﷺ did not eat it. So I guess it was more of his own personal intake on that. And the Prophet ﷺ told the people that were there, كُلُوا فَإِنِّي لَوْ اشْتَهَيْتُهَا أَكَلْتُهَا, eat it. If I had the taste for it, if I had the desire to eat it, I would have eaten it. And of course, certainly al-Qurtubi comments and he said, well, all of this is not necessarily an evidence to prove that this was forbidden to eat. In other words, rabbit being forbidden to consume. And even this piece of it, just because the Prophet ﷺ did not eat it, perhaps maybe out of disgust, does not necessarily make it haram. And because we know that the Prophet ﷺ had said the same quote over al-Dab, which basically is the desert lizard, and the Prophet ﷺ told them that he did not say his people, basically nothing that he was accustomed to seeing his own people eating from it. So he was disgusted from consuming or eating it. So, but he had given them the permission to eat it. And we know that this hadith would basically, I guess, surpass all of them since it is an authentic hadith. And let's see what the hadith says. So they were basically passing by a certain area, بمر الظهران, and then they caught a rabbit. Basically caught it, and then they once they got it, they brought it to Abu Talha, then they slaughtered it, and then they basically had sent the, I guess, the area of part of the rabbit, which basically is going to be the hips and also the thighs for that rabbit, and the Prophet ﷺ accepted it. Did he necessarily eat it or not, or did he just accept it as, well, it's permissible and just accept it? What did he do with it? But he just accepted it. So just accepting it is a sign that it was halal to consume. I actually wanted to comment on something else as I came across a very important figure, and I thought it would be really important to talk about this great scholar. And let's say this great scholar. I thought it was important to talk about him. Let me see if I can. Yes, this great scholar. So why did I want to talk about this great scholar? First of all, he's Palestinian. Doesn't necessarily make him the most important scholar, but just wanted to mention him. And certainly he was one of those scholars that reviewed and actually had a whole series on Abu Dawood in reviewing the hadith and so forth. I'm just going to right there give you, I guess, some of what was said about him. Okay, let's see. So his name is Ibn Raslan. Ibn Raslan, he basically was a very famous scholar. You could say that he was born 773 Hijriya. I love this website. You could see it's called Tarajim. Really good website, and definitely did an outstanding job in making, I guess, the resources available. But, here's what you could do in order for you to at least get, something that you'll probably be able to read. You can get a translation. You can simply just open it up like that. Okay, you're going to go like that. And let's see right there. And we're going to, hold on, we're going to get a translation. Just wait and see. Okay. And we're going to get a translation for this page, inshallah. Let's see. And here we go. I'm going to go like that. All right, here we go. So we're just going to translate this page for you to see it. And that way, you can actually see it right there. Okay, so where was he from? He was from Palestine, Ramla. Ramla is, it is right next to Lid, and it's approximately, if I'm not mistaken, it's approximately perhaps less than 12 kilometers, or maybe, yeah, around that number, maybe between it and Gaza. Okay, let's see. And of course, some of the most important teachers, but I want to go over some of what was said about Ibn Raslan. Remember, the reason why we're doing this is because Ibn Raslan himself was one of these scholars that had explained Abu Dawud. Why am I even commenting about Ibn Abu Dawud? I'm commenting about Abu Dawud because he was the main narrator for this hadith about the rabbit. So I wanted to basically go over these resources in regards to the most important scholar that we just went to that commented that this hadith was not authentic. And I thought it would be good to talk about Ibn Raslan since we're basically commenting and using his reference. Okay, so his name Ibn Raslan or Arsalan. Okay, so both you could say in different names. Sometimes there can be a slight difference from one name, from one way or to pronunciate basically one name and another difference, basically slightly different. Just like this one, they just added the Hamza. So you had different scholars had different ways of saying his name, but he's basically famous for Abu al-Abbas al-Ramli al-Shafi'i. You could see that he was Madhab Shafi'i. One thing about Palestine, all right, the general madhab is Madhab Shafi'i, but it isn't until later when the Uthmani Khilafah basically had imposed the Madhab Hanafi as the constitution. So that then became let's call it the reference, or let's call it the constitution, especially in areas that involve governance. So we're talking about family law is based on the Hanafi madhab. You're talking a lot about transactions, laws and transactions. They would be Hanafi madhab as well. But in general, Palestine is Shafi'i madhab in general. Now, same thing if you're talking about in areas perhaps that are in Jordan, some areas in Syria as well. When it comes to government laws, most of it is based on the Hanafi madhab because it was under the Uthmani governance, and the Uthmani governance imposed the Hanafi madhab. And simply, of course, it became the most or the dominant madhab throughout all the countries that were ruled by the Uthmani Khilafah. Okay, let's see. He says that he was living in Bayt al-Maqdis. One thing about Bayt al-Maqdis, if you were to go around, maybe I could show you right there, just a really quick thing. Sorry for the images right there. Let's just hide all of that. And let's say, I'm going to show you just al-Masjid al-Aqsa right there. And in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, you will see just around al-Masjid al-Aqsa, each and every single place. Maybe I could right there just help you see each and every single place. There would be sometimes just a corner, or just like this one, this would be al-Qubba, where a scholar would be sitting. He was known and famous to basically sitting there, and it became basically an area that, well, this is Qubbat al-Silsila right there. Okay, here we go. This is the better picture that I wanted. Okay, so you could see, for example, each and every single one of these. You could see al-Masjid right there. This is the basically al-Qubbat al-Sakhra, and then this one would be al-Masjid al-Aqsa right there. The whole thing is al-Masjid al-Aqsa. I'm just going to make this really big for you to see it. Okay, so the whole thing is al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Okay, my home was around this area. This is how close I was living in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, or in Palestine. Right around this area is basically going to be my home. Yeah, well, around this area, somewhere around here. Okay, so, and of course, this would be al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Well, the whole thing is al-Masjid al-Aqsa. All of this that you see is basically considered al-Masjid al-Aqsa. All of this, 144 dunams, okay? And certainly, when you see all of this being the place where it was considered as part of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, all of this would be Masjid al-Aqsa. But Later, in order to distinguish between this masjid and this masjid, this was called al-Masjid al-Aqsa and this was Qubbat al-Sakhra, just to distinguish it. But the whole entire thing is al-Masjid al-Aqsa. I also want you to see right there, you see these little tiny arches right there. Those are right now homes, but you also see this arch right there, this arch and these arches, and you wonder, well, why are these arches right there? So what in this one right there, this is Bab al-Rahma right there, this is Dar al-Hadith. This is where I studied a lot of my fiqh and a lot of basically hadith, and certainly right there you got basically Bab al-Asbat right there. All of this that you see, they were basically schools of fiqh, schools of hadith, schools of nahu. So right there, this was called al-Qubba al-Nahawiyya right here, and it was basically where Arabic grammar was taught. And right outside this door right there, this used to be my secondary school. Basically I went there for 10th grade and part of 11th grade. Okay, so this would be basically the madhab Hanafi, courthouse. Okay, this was it. This is right now, this madhab Hanafi courthouse is actually taken over by the Israeli army, and you cannot even look there. All right, but this was actually right there, the Hanafi courthouse. And you could see it was right next to, in fact, it's right outside the door of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, right outside the door. Okay, so now that you see all of this, each and every single one was actually either a home for a scholar of fiqh, or a place for a scholar of hadith, or basically the place that was organizing all of these. And these areas were schools, and some of them were dorms for the students that were studying in al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Imam al-Ghazali, when he came to al-Masjid al-Aqsa, so every single one of these, I don't know if can we actually see it farther? No, that's the farthest. Okay. What you would see in these areas, so you could see, well, this is a water reservoir right there. This is a water reservoir, okay? But you would see that there would be a slight area, kind of like a place for sitting down, like this one. This would be right there. A scholar would sit, and the students would basically gather. So in this area, and certainly in here, they would be basically, which is called Bab al-Rahma, right now officially closed by Israel, basically, and there would be classes of fiqh, classes of hadith in each and every single one of these. And of course, certainly this was considered a university to teach fiqh, to teach nahu, and so forth. So I just want to give you an idea. When was this built, since we're talking about Ibn Raslan? Well, this itself was built 86-year Hijriya by Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan. 86-year Hijriya, so that's after the death of the Prophet ﷺ by, give or take, 75, well, no, 75, yeah, 75 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ during the Umayyad Khalifa. Okay, and certainly this is part that, you know, you could see right there, this is what they would call the Wailing Wall. This is what they will call the Wailing Wall, and you could see it's actually part of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. This right there, you could see that there's a little kind of like a stairway, or not a stairway, but right now they basically made it as like a slide entrance. Okay, but all of this was basically a neighborhood that also was part of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and this wall is a wall of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. You can see here's al-Masjid al-Aqsa right there. This is a wall for al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and there was a neighborhood right here. But in 1967, Israel committed a major massacre, and completely exactly what is happening right now in Gaza, that's exactly what they did at the time. That's what they did at the time, completely wiped out everyone out in the neighborhood, basically took out and demolished their homes completely in order to basically keep an open space for their worship right there. Okay, so this would be right there. You could see this basically. Here we go. In fact, you still have a lot of these ruins from the different castles of the Umayyad Khilafah that was there. And right there, you could see this is the entrance to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Basically, this is actually called the entrance of Al-Maghariba, the Moroccan gate, basically because you had a lot of Muslims coming from Morocco, from Algeria, from Tunisia, from Libya that used to reside in this neighborhood. That was considered their neighborhood as the Moroccan neighborhood. Okay, so this would be right there. You could see Bab al-Silisla would be right there. I know you can't really see it because I would have to basically take the photo from the inside for you to see it. So there would be an exit right there. This would be Bab al-Silisla right there. Basically walk, and let's say if I can take you to my house, you basically would, I'm going to take you to my house. You would basically exit from this door, walk this way, and you'll find yourself within this area. That's how close I live to Masjid al-Aqsa.
So you invite us for coffee, inshallah?
You know what? If I do go to Palestine, inshallah,
Yeah,
I will definitely tell you all that I am there in order for us to basically plan, some trip to go there. This was my hadith school. This was, hold on, let me show you where this was my right there. This is where I took the ijaza in Tajweed. And yep, right there. This little, it was Dar al-Quran, and this is Dar al-Hadith. Okay. And this is where I was only 15 years old. But my mom would put us with the adults to study after school hadith, fiqh, ibadat, and classes right there. And this was the Bab al-Rahma, where we would take all the, I would call it the tazkiyah classes. And then for 10th grade, I went to school right there. And in order for me to go to my other school, when I was, I guess, younger, I basically had to every single day go from this door and go all the way to Bab al-Asbat, and then basically go down this way and then go all the way right around this area for my school. Okay, so just imagine that. Just imagine just living in this area, and definitely a lot of things basically happening there. Okay, and by the way, what's around here, all these ruins, it was Israel's attempt to find any sign that proves that Israel basically has the temple that they were looking for, and all they found was Umayyad castles and Umayyad ruins. So why were these ruins basically buried there? Palestine, or Al-Quds, basically underwent over 6 different earthquakes, and with every single earthquake, you basically had to build over the debris than in the demolished homes, and it was a lot easier to sometimes just build over the debris than actually rebuild it, or at least renovate it. It was sometimes easier to just rebuild. So this is just an idea about this. Now let's go back for Ibn Raslan, since we're talking about him. Now we kind of took you to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, but yes, it's very important that we would see and learn about basically these scholars and actually see what, and I know someone's writing something in the chat right there. Let's see, you want me to go back as no one can enter? No, I can go back as an American citizen. Well, I mean, yes, I can go back, but not necessarily live there because Israel, it's a complex issue that Israel basically had made a number of different strategies in order to empty Palestine from its own citizens. So they basically had certain people that were living in Al-Quds area carry, not by choice, but carry Israeli, it's not a citizenship per se, but it's a temporary residency. Okay, and this temporary residency, the reason why they would give them a temporary residency is because they don't recognize them as real residents of Al-Quds. So they were just delaying figuring out what they should do, basically, quote unquote, with the residents of Al-Quds, with the residents of the Quds area, the Jerusalem area, until basically they would, little by little figure out one strategy at a time to empty the place. And part of that included me, which is if you were to live longer than 2.5 years outside of Palestine, they basically would consider that you had been disqualified from having the right to live in Al-Quds. I can go there only as a visitor for perhaps maybe 90 days, but no longer. And certainly, any Jew or any person that wants to support Israel can basically live there, even if they had no ancestry there, but it's enough to support Israel to become part of it. Okay, and certainly have the right to live there and get health insurance and all of that. Of course, no need to talk about Israel's apartheid. Okay, let's see. Nazila Bayt al-Maqdis. He basically lived in al-Bayt al-Maqdis, that is Ibn Raslan, and certainly lived 775 Hijriya. That's when he was living there. And let me just turn on the AC because I hope you can't hear the AC. So tell me if it's basically too loud. So we'll basically have to turn it off. Okay.
We hear nothing, alhamdulillah.
You hear nothing? Okay, good. Okay, so Ibn Raslan basically lived in a Ramla. Ramla, like I said, it's about 12, 16 kilometers basically from Gaza. So just to let you know. And he basically, I want you to look at this one. You know what? Hold on, I'm still not done. Okay, so Ibn Raslan, I loved what was actually mentioned about him in this tarjama. And let's see. He said, وَنَشَأَ بِهَا لم يعلم له صبوة فحفظ القرآن وله نحو 10 سنين. Okay, so what did he say? He said he was born in this year. Oh dear, what did I just do? Okay, here we go. And he said, I want to see if the translation is accurate. And he grew up there. He did not know how to be a boy. No, that's not what it means. Oh, this is a very bad translation. No, لم يعلم له صبوة. In other words, he was not being childish. He wasn't being childish. He was taking talab al-ilm seriously. Even he even memorized the Quran by age 10, and he would be basically busy in seeking ilm, including Arabic grammar, Lugha Arabiya, and certainly all the different poems that involved learning fiqh. And I want you to focus on this one for a bit, because at the time, in order to memorize fiqh, it didn't necessarily just depend on understanding, but it also depended on memorizing certain poems in order to keep the fiqh. So think of it as a song. So think of it as a song, as a poem, as a melody. To keep all that ilm from getting lost, they would make it into a poem in order to collect all that ilm and not confuse the ideas, but it would be done in a poem. And this is the same way that in the area of Mauritania, until the time of today, they would basically memorize the ilm, whether you're talking about nahu, you're talking about fiqh, you're talking about tafsir. It would be basically done in poems, and the stanzas, they would basically help the person memorize this type of a rhythm, this type of a melody, and memorize the ilm in a set of a song type of thing. So think of it this way, okay? And he had read al-Hawi. Now, mind you, al-Hawi is a huge book for al-Mawardi, and it's almost give or take like 25 volumes. It's a huge book, and that was still considered as what? That was still considered as a secondary or a school level, just mind you. Why am I even emphasizing on this one? Because unfortunately today, we're seeing 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds being treated like they are children. I want you to look at these great examples and how they were basically learning these types of ulum, these types of books of fiqh. Al-Hawi is a book of fiqh, and you're talking about that he was reading it every single day. They basically had to read from Al-Hawi, which is 25 volumes, and basically learn everything about fiqh al-Shafi'i. So this is in fiqh al-Shafi'i, the fiqh for the madhab Shafi'i. And that was basically considered as the school level. So what we're seeing today in the school system is really making our children, one, entitled, two, failures, and three, definitely completely wiping out their maturity. If you can have scholars like that, or at least students at the time, I know he was exceptional, but this was common, by the way, at that time, to basically learn all of that. Let's see. And أخذ عنه الفرائض. What are الفرائض? الفرائض are, let's see how they translated it right there. In systems, evidence, worked on grammar, language systems. Let me see how arithmetic duties. No, this is a wrong translation. So الفرائض is basically the science in learning how to distribute inheritance. It has nothing to do with obligatory and duties. This is talking about inheritance, the laws of inheritance. Al-Hisab, that's arithmetic. Okay, and then he basically became the teacher in al-Khasakiyya. So basically a school, I guess in Bayt al-Maqdis. I'm not sure exactly where the school is, but he basically taught there for some while, and then he left teaching there. I want you to look at this one because there's a similarity between him. I could see some similarities between him and al-Ghazali, because al-Ghazali, he also taught in Madrasa Nizamiya in Baghdad, and then he left that school and went to Bayt al-Maqdis. So now you're seeing that his stories, one, he was teaching and certainly busy being the head of the school, and then completely leaves teaching and isolates himself from the society. Well, that's the same thing that al-Ghazali had done. He was teaching and then isolated himself from the society and went to Bayt al-Maqdis for 4 years. And later he basically wrote the book. Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the book that basically describes his experience in search of truth, or at least in search, well, I shouldn't be saying search of truth, but as a way to basically lay the foundation of staying away from doubt. Okay, let's see, let's continue right there. And he basically, let's see, تركها وأقبل على الله وعلى الاشتغال تبرعا وعلى التصوف وجلس في الخلوة مدة لا يكلم أحدا. I want you to look at this one. وأخذ عن جماعة من أهل الطريقة وسمع من جماعة في الحديث. Well, okay, I want you to look at this one. This is extremely important. I wonder how it was translated right there. I'm just going to right there highlight this because this is extremely important. This is really common. Let's say right there. And he said, and he took the teaching of, okay, hold on. Then he left it and accepted Allah. Okay, I want you to look at this one. accepted Allah and worked as a donation in Sufism, and he sat in seclusion for a while without talking to anyone, and he took from a group of people of the way, and he heard from a group of people in hadith and others until he became an imam in fiqh. This is a horrible translation. This is a horrible translation. Let me explain what this is actually saying, and then you can compare what is being said right here and what is actually being translated right there. Let's look at this one. Okay, in the Arabic, what it's saying is that he basically taught at this school, okay, and stayed teaching there for some while, and then he left it, but then aqbala ala Allah. Aqbala ala Allah, it doesn't mean that he accepted Allah. It's not that he wasn't accepting Allah, but aqbala ala Allah is basically an idiom to mean that he was dedicating his life to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't mean that he accepted Allah. He was living in somewhat of a dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a commitment. And this is extremely important, that every once in a while, let there be these times where, you are in seclusion, or you're trying to basically live just in a special relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically what Ibn Raslan was doing. So aqbala ala Allah, to live this relationship between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where he would be engaged in dhikr, in talab al-ilm, in memorizing Quran, basically in different ways to seek ilm and revive his own ilm without all the distractions from social media, okay, or even from an outside social relations, okay? They didn't have more social media at the time for sure, okay? But any way of communicating or socializing with people, he would basically abandon that and stay within his home, just doing his revision, reading Quran, doing tasbih, and so forth. Okay, now that was what he was doing, and that was his own. When you say tabarra'an, so this is basically to say that it was his own commitment, it was his own will, it was basically his own desire to basically let's say reserve this time for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to look at this one, that he basically also had dedicated himself to at-tasawwuf. I want to look at this one. What is tasawwuf? So certainly here they translate it as Sufism, rightly so, but I would like to explain, when we're speaking about Sufism, Sufism went through different stages. It's not just one stage, but Sufism went through different stages. Not all Sufism is necessarily the way that we see today. Sufism at the earliest times, it was more all about, you are dedicating yourself to making a relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, increasing in dhikr, increasing in ibadah, and basically that was the Sufism. You were basically focusing on increase in ibadah and decrease in sin, and therefore the classes in tasawwuf were all about teaching the different ways of tazkiyah, the different ways of shaitan, how the shaitan can manipulate you, or shaitan can delude your heart, or different ways of doing mental tazkiyah, heart tazkiyah, spiritual tazkiyah. What is tazkiyah? Tazkiyah basically means purification. So this is extremely important to keep in mind, that when we speak about tasawwuf, this isn't in any shape or form saying that, yes, this is a bid'ah, he was involved in bid'ah. Not necessarily. This was what actually kept the ummah intact and connected to their deen as a form of discipline. Keep this one in mind. As a form of discipline, that they had to do certain amount of dhikr, that they had to basically relate to one another in learning how to share, in learning how to stay quiet for a long time, in learning how to do salah ala nabi for a long time, in learning how to do Quran in commitment, in doing qiyam al-layl, in doing all these different methods in order to purify the heart. And unfortunately, I would say certain areas, without naming names, certain areas, I would say, ruined the reputation for tasawwuf, and unfortunately did not replace what they had, where they were right about some of the bid'ah and some of the innovations there, but in order to, replace all the good things, or at least in order to keep all the good things that they were doing, you needed to replace what was wrong. Okay, so and maybe perhaps take away what was wrong and what was considered an innovation, but to entirely cancel out Sufism, even though it had contributed in the Ummah some of the greatest methods of discipline. And I mean the greatest methods of discipline, the greatest method of inner discipline, outer discipline, the discipline within the society. Right now, we're seeing many people that may seek the ilm but lack discipline. Seek ilm, they have great ilm, but they lack that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what tasawwuf was actually doing. Tasawwuf, think of it as institutions, not one institution, but it was actually institutions. Every single institution basically used what they considered as their experimented method in order to reach that discipline. So you had some tariqas, and that's basically right there. So you could say when it was talking about the tariqa in here, it basically said the people of the way. No, this is a very, very wrong translation. This isn't talking about the people of the way. This is actually talking about a school. Every single Sufi school basically use their own experiment, their own experience, their own method in order to help its murideen. Al-murid is basically the student. So the student would basically learn from the teacher different methods of focus. So you had some schools basically use the method of silence, other schools the method of probably added to it a motion, and this motion could be turning around, just like the dervish in the Mawlawiya tariqa, basically just turning around and around and around, or spinning basically. And me just thinking about it got me dizzy right on the spot. Okay, and you had other tariqas that might, just like the Naqshbandi, they would have a certain physical movement, a small physical movement, or sometimes a very aggressive physical movement. And you had others, it was done in group, in a congregation, to basically say Yahu or Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, or do different things. And at one point, it was to, I guess, to give them a certain level of focus. But then later on, this level of focus has started becoming more of a cult. They basically had separated themselves from the Sunnah, and it became that is the only practice in the religion. And then that involved basically the separation in they were slowly distancing themselves from seeking ilm. So if you don't have ilm along with the tasawwuf, you're definitely going to be getting into that deviation without you realizing. But if you were to learn the good things from it tasawwuf, and basically learn along with the tasawwuf, and learn how to differentiate between the different methods and the different resources, and learning the sunnah of doing things, then that would be good tasawwuf. Or if we're talking about disciplining the heart, disciplining the mind, purifying the heart, purifying the mind, and learning how to stay in that discipline, how to stay within that dhikr, how to stay within a connection. I don't mean by believing in what many of the Sufis might consider that, yes, we're connecting with the people of the past, or connecting with the Salihin, or the Salihin are going to save us or do anything of that sort. Definitely there was some influence from the different religions, from the different ideologies, philosophies that surrounded the Muslims within certain areas. So you might have Tijani Tariqa use the voodoo as one of those methods within their tasawwuf, or within their method of purification. You will have maybe certain areas in India perhaps use the methods of tasawwuf right there, or methods coming basically from the Hindus. Other areas they might use the methods from the Christians, other areas Orthodox Christians, other areas from Jews, etc. So it depends really on that area. But Islam, لا شرقية ولا غربية. Islam is not coming, not from the east and not from the west. It's basically coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I just wanted to comment on this one. So not everything is in tasawwuf is necessarily wrong, but I would be extremely careful in denouncing everything about tasawwuf, and I would be extremely careful in accepting everything about tasawwuf. I'll tell you one thing. There's no question that the people of tasawwuf probably have the best mannerisms. Definitely the best mannerisms, because what tasawwuf is always focused on is learning how to be humble, taking away that arrogance, dealing in being with the poor, helping basically the people around you detach themselves from dunya and going and heading towards akhir. That's true tasawwuf. If we're talking about that as tasawwuf, then hey, include me in, and I would love to basically learn those methods. But if we're talking about tasawwuf, where it basically just detaches the relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and connects you with some people, or connects you with the shaykh, and the shaykh basically is not learned and creating his own imagination of tafsir, your own imagination of reinterpreting the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then definitely you want to avoid those classes, just because it may sound that it's sounding, I would say, harmonious, or very beautiful eloquence and very beautiful words that this person might say, and definitely very motivational lectures you would hear from them. That does not necessarily make it Islam. Islam goes back all the way, tracing all the way to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, let's see. So basically he had become an imam in the science of fiqh, in the science of usul. In usul and fiqh are basically two different sciences. Okay, al-fiqh is basically learning the detailed rulings. Al-usul is learning what would be considered as the vertebra of learning usul. So you're basically learning the resources, how to use these resources, Quran, Sunnah, how to make use of it. What does this imperative verb supposed to mean? What if this imperative verb was annexed to another compound statement? Does this mean that this is obligatory? When the list goes on and on. What makes something valid? What makes something invalid? And the list goes on and on. Just to see this one, let's see right there. And he said musharikan fil hadith wa tafsiri wal kalam, and he was basically associated in learning al-hadith, learning hadith, at-tafsir wal-kalam. What? Talking? Let's see how they basically translated it here. Interpretation and speech. No, absolutely not. Okay, so he was participating in the science of hadith, learning hadith, which basically is the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, anything that he had said, anything that he had done, and anything that the Prophet ﷺ basically was described with, or any quotation that basically was attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, let's see. Tafsir is Quranic interpretation, not any type of interpretation. Al-kalam is involving aqeedah. Look at that. Here they translate it as speech, okay? But I want you to see, I'm trying to show you that translation and how off sometimes it can get. and, just want you to see it right there. But at the same time, just want you to at least, compare the two. And of course, and other those sciences as well. But I want you to look at this one. مع حرصه على سائر أنواع الطاعات من صلاة وصيام وتهجد ومرابطة بحيث لم تكن تخلو سنة من سنيه عن إقامة على جانب البحر قاعدا بالدعاء إلى الله سرا وجهرا آخذا على أيدي الظلمة مؤثرا محبة الخمول والشغف بعدم الظهور تاركا لقبول ما يعرض عليه من الدنيا ووظائفها حتى أن الأمير حسام الدين جدد بالقدس مدرسة وعرض عليه مشيختها وقرر له فيها كل يوم 10 دراهم فضة فأبى. I want you to look at this one. How did he translate it? Let's see. So that 1 year of his year, okay, without a stay on one side. The sea is praying to God. The sea is praying to God. Oh man, this is horrible. The sea is praying to God secretly and openly, taking on the hands of darkness, influencing the love of idleness and the passion not to appear, leaving to accept what is offered to man. This is horrible translation. Okay, you know what? I wonder if ChatGPT would give me a better translation because this is horrible. Let me explain what this is saying. Okay, so he's basically this tarjama, basically this biography is saying that he was very keen on spending time in basically worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing salah and certainly fasting and praying during the night. And wa murabata. What is al-murabata? Al-murabata is basically staying fixated in one spot to do dhikr, to do seeking ilm, etc. In other words, you're not moving too much. You're not moving too much, meaning you're not changing positions, no, but basically staying within a certain area, staying put to basically help yourself stay longer in focus, in seeking ilm, and keeping yourself away from any other distractions. Okay, this is what it means. بحيث لم تخلو سنة من سنين عن إقامة على جانب البحر, to the point that not a single year had passed, but he would stay just at the shore of the sea, and he would stay put, making dua in private and out loud. And he would also, well, this isn't only in his own moment of seclusion in at least, being spiritual, but he would also, when you say آخذاً على أيدي الظلمة, here they basically said taking on the hands of darkness. Absolutely not. This is actually meaning, this is a metaphor to mean that he was a sharp and an ardent person against those that would commit injustice. I compared the two interpretations, that he was a sharp and an ardent person to stop injustice, and he would مؤثرا محبة الخمول والشغف بعدم الظهور. And what he used to prefer was basically his love in basically staying away from being public, and all he would want to basically stay away from being lazy. And even though he was offered a position basically to be in the school, and that he would be one of the key teachers there, and he would give him 10 dirahim. So that would be 10 dirahim fidda. That would perhaps be equivalent to perhaps maybe during our times, perhaps maybe $6,000 to $7,000 a month, almost that. But he still rejected that offer, and he basically considered that he would teach without taking all that money, and he would basically just spend it and distribute it around for the needy people. Just look at that. Okay, let's see. And وربما أمر صاحبه بتعاطي تفرقته بنفسه وله محافظة. Let's see this one. And sometimes he would order his basically, I guess, the person that was like an assistant for him, he would go himself and distribute it on the poor people that are around. And he said, and he would basically be keen on a set of different adhkar, a set of different adhkar. The most important book of adhkar, I would probably say, is Hisn al-Muslim. Let me show you that one. And that one's really easy to find, okay? And you can get it as a PDF. This is basically it. And guess what? I have a whole series of lectures just explaining Hisn al-Muslim, the whole thing. Okay? So just keep that one in mind. And basically, you can get that Hisn al-Muslim, even if you didn't know what dhikr to do, you can basically have that right there as a PDF. Maybe I can give it to you as a PDF and you can learn those du'as right there. Du'a al-dukhul al-khala, du'a al-khuruj, how to exit, and all of that. And it's available for us to basically memorize these adhkar right there. And he was always keen on making sure that he would do these adhkar and do these remembrance for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times. Okay, where's that piece of it? Okay, what was I doing? Hold on, forgot where. Oh no, I lost my Ibn Raslan. Is this it? No, this is Ibrahim al-Nakhai. Where did I lose it? Okay, here we go, found it. All right, so let's continue right there. Just wanted you to see that he was in wird is different than a dhikr, okay? In adhkar, it includes making dua, it includes glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Il-wird would basically be a certain amount of Quran that he would read on a daily basis. That's il-wird. There's a certain amount that he would basically read every single day and would not skip it. That every single day I'm going to be reading, let's say, 2 juz'ah or 1 juz'ah or 1 hizb or whatever it is. And he would order al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar. He would order for what is good and forbid what is bad. Mu'ridan an ad-dunya, basically leaving dunya. And that was not something that he was basically going for. And I want you to see right there, and Sakhawi had basically said he was living in asceticism. What does asceticism? Does that mean living in poverty? It doesn't necessarily mean living in poverty, but it just basically means that money to you, dunya to you, is not worth for you to invest all your time in it, but instead you want to focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your focus is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your focus is basically to give up on dunya in order to head to al-akhirah. Il-wara'. What's il-wara'? Il-wara' is not necessarily leaving haram. Il-wara' is a different level. It's leaving sometimes halal because you're afraid that might take you on the borders of haram. So this is going a mile farther than just abstaining from haram. No, he was leaving a lot of halal things in order to stay away from even the margins of haram. And he was living at taqashuf. What is it, taqashuf? He was not spending a lot. He was basically trying to live on small scraps of different pieces, whether it's food or even garments, or basically just a couple things in dunya. Why? This is important. One main reason why mental illness is on the rise, because part of it is what we see, that social media, the life that we're living in, is always focused on wanting and basically encouraging you that in order to be happy, that you need to get more. You need to buy a car, you need to get the latest phone, you need to get the latest the latest things in dunya, the latest name brand, and hey, your house is basically containing these items, all of these different things, and that's basically not taqashuf. Taqashuf is living on a small amount in a number of things because you are basically not wanting to collect matter, but you are wanting to collect value. So in order to focus and let yourself focus on value, you have to reduce the amount of matter that basically is surrounding you. By reducing the number of different matters around you, you're bringing in one, less information, less distraction in your brain, and certainly you're helping yourself stay focused. That's why the scholars and the people in Mauritania, for example, they have the best memory and the sharpest memory in memorizing things just from hearing it just once. And if you thought ChatGPT was intelligent, if you thought these recordings and these people were intelligent, well, wait till you see these people. And with their memory really being a miraculous memory, and all of that was because they really have very few items. These few items in this open space of literally nothing there, only the desert and nothing to be there, is making them focus on nothing but the ilm, and that was their place of entertainment. So what else was he doing? اتباع السنة, following as-sunnah, وصحة العقيدة, and making sure that he understands his aqidah right, and not only taking that type of Sufism without having the right understanding and how to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how to understand the relationship between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and plus basically how we get to tazkiyah. How do we get to that purification away from all these different distractions? And of course, I want to jump right there. And he was basically a famous person that everyone was basically knowing and recognizing all the ilm that was basically taught by him and learned by him, that he became one of the major figures in in seeking ilm and teaching ilm. And certainly he had one of those. This was the key one, that he'd explained Sunan Abi Dawud in 11 volumes. I want to jump all the way right there. So he basically, let's say right there, when he had died, I want to look at this one. When he died, it was said, I want you to look at this one. لما ألحد سمعه الحفار يقول رب أنزلني منزلا مباركا وأنت خير المنزلين وأنت خير المنزلين. ورآه حسين الكردي أحد الصالحين بعد موته فقال له ما فعل الله بك؟ قال أوقفني بين يديه وقال يا أحمد أعطيتك العلم فما عملت به؟ قال علمته وعملت به. فقال صدقت يا أحمد تمنى علي. فقلت تغفر لمن صلى علي؟ فقال قد غفرت لمن صلى عليك وحضر جنازتك ولم يلبث الرائي أن مات. Okay, so what happened? While he was getting buried, a miraculous thing happened, and they were basically hearing a sound reading, رَبِّ أَنزِلْنِي مُنزَلًا مُبَارَكًا. Ya Allah, أنزلني, take me down to a blessed position. وَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ الْمُنزِلِينَ, and you are the best of those that would take people into the best positions. And later, Hussein al-Kurdi, basically, I guess one of the scholars, one of the Salihin, they saw him in a dream after his death, and he asked him in the dream, what happened? What did Allah do with you? And he said, and what did you do with the ilm that I had given you? And he said, I taught it, and I had put it into practice in my life. So then he was told, you are right. So make it your wish. And then he said that you would forgive whoever would pray for me. Sallallahu alayhi would basically mean pray for me. So then he was told, قَدْ غَفَرْتُ لِمَنْ صَلَّى عَلَيْكَ, I had forgiven whoever prays for you, and whoever attended your funeral, and it wasn't long, and the person that saw this dream basically died. Okay, where is this coming from? This is coming from a book. It's basically a kitab tarajum. It's called al-Badri طالع بمحاسن من بعد القرن السابع. This is for Shawkani. It's about in almost 6 volumes or 7 volumes. Is it? Well, yeah, about that. It depends on which copy you're talking about. In some copies, they might actually make it in 12 volumes, blow it up. But so just wanted to note that, just so beautiful to read about some of these scholars, because we don't see these examples anymore. And certainly, to see these examples is in at least read about them. Even Shafi'i used to say, I'm not from the Salihin, but just being around them and just remembering them is a way to inspire us to be a part of Salihin. And hopefully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remember us as the ones to seek to get inspired by the Salihin. Okay, let's continue right there. So, of course, we said al-Qurtubi wanted to say a couple points in regards to that ayah, which basically gets us to the 4th point. عَلَى طَاعِمٍ يَطْعَمُهُ, meaning, hold on, what is the ayah right there? Were you actually seeing? Oh dear, you should have told me that you weren't capable of seeing what I was reading. You weren't capable of seeing what I was reading. Okay. Oh dear. I thought you were capable of seeing it. Allah al-Musta'an. Okay. All right. Well, I wanted you to see what I was reading. Did you see the English side when I was reading it? I was hoping that
we just see it.
You just, oh dear, you should have said something.
Don't worry, I enjoyed the Arabic.
All right, well, I was basically, this is it right there in the English translation. I wish you had told me about it. So this is what they translated as fara'id, and certainly in translating it, that was horrible translation right there. I hope somebody brought it up to my attention that they can't say it, because that would definitely, look at this one, and this is what did it say right there? That he was participating in interpretation and hadith, basically aqidah and ilm or al-kalam and tafsir. Okay, let's continue right there. Wanted to basically get Tafseer al-Qurtubi. Let's get to Tafseer al-Qurtubi. على طاعم يطعمه, and take this one down, and let me get our Quran copy up in order for you to see it. Okay, now I'm sorry. I think I opened so many tabs that I got lost myself. Okay, here we go. I found it. Yeah, see, when you open too many tabs, you end up getting lost yourself. There we go. All right, there we go. So point number 4, and we are where? Oh, this is Surah An-Nur. Oh dear. Okay, everybody, that's it. Today is, hold on. We're going to get there, inshallah. Oh man, you really jumped. La ilaha illallah. You should memorize the page, right? Okay, here we go. We're getting there. Okay, here we go. This is it. Okay. And we are at this word right there. Sorry about that, everybody. You could see, I think I opened too many tabs that I confused myself. Not only you. Trust me, I got confused myself. Okay, here we go. You should be able to see a Quran copy and al-Qurtubi. Okay, here we go. So number 4, على قل لا أجد فيما أوحي إلي محرما على طاعم يطعمه. What is طاعم? الطاعم comes from the root طعام. The word طعام actually means to put something in something. Okay, so that's why even if you were to, let's say, put in perhaps maybe gold inside some wooden piece, that's basically called an it'am as well. If you were it'am al-imam, it doesn't mean to feed the imam. No, it'am al-imam actually means to help the imam when he makes a mistake in the recitation. You would basically give the imam the hint on how to basically recite right. That's it'am al-imam, not necessarily giving food to the imam. Okay, in some cultures they would think that it's giving food to the imam, and they would bring food to the imam every single time they would come because they think it's a sunnah to feed the imam. It's not necessarily a sunnah to feed the imam, but it'am al-imam basically means that when the imam makes a mistake in al-qira'ah, that those that are behind him are basically the huffaz behind him, they would correct the imam. And ta'am or ta'ama also means to eat. Okay, so when here you look at it, this is basically involving whoever is eating. So this ayah is basically saying, well, in regards to food and what one will consume in terms of food, I only know the following items to be in haram. So we did talk about this one. So this basically is not a metaphor, but this is talking about what one would consume in terms of food. And certainly you could see another qira'at, awha, not uhiya, but awha. So قل لا أجد فيما أوحى إلي. Not uhiya, but awha. This is another qira'ah. Let's see another qira'ah. يطعمه. In another qira'ah. Okay. Don't take my word for everything. I'm just reading it as you are. Okay. I'm not specialized in this. Okay. In another qira'ah, على طاعم طعمه. I'm reading it as you are. So I'm not specialized in this. I'm just reading it as you are. In another qira'ah, طاعم طعمه على طاعم طعمه إلا أن يكون ميتة إلا أن تكون ميتة or الجثة. Okay, so قرئ تكون and ميتة in another قراءة إلا أن تكون ميتة, not ميتة. Okay, now let's get to the other part. So at least regardless of the different qira'at, we know that there's a word right there that's a key word. أو دما مسفوحا. So the ayah was basically laying out different items that are considered as haram items to consume as food. Okay, what are they? Well, basically dead meat, dead animals, 2, gushing blood, and 3, pork. That's a pretty easy one. But the question is, if you say gushing blood, why the word masfuh, and what does the word masfuh itself mean? So the word masfuh means gushing or means flowing. Okay, so when you look at masfuh, this is basically telling us that not all blood is necessarily haram, but there's this item, this part of the word that's basically making it like a compound word and letting us know that the blood that is impermissible and therefore basically impure to consume is the gushing blood. So what does a gushing blood actually mean? Are we talking about that other blood is basically not haram? So like I guess like a steak, or perhaps maybe when we slaughter the animal, sometimes there's that redness that basically is there. Is that also making it not haram to consume? What does that even mean? Let's see. Al-Mawardi, a scholar from the Shafi'i madhab, he basically said the blood that is not the gushing blood, if it is basically right there already, let's say clogged, or what do they call it? Not clogged. What do we call it? do we call it clogged? Basically the blood, the blood that basically starts getting hardened. What do we call that? Help me find a word.
تجلط.
Blood clot.
Well, that's exactly what it is in Lugha Arabiya. You know, when you
Clot.
have
Blood clot.
clots, there you go, clots. That's basically what it is. So when you have these blood clotted, the blood basically clotted within the veins, this is whether we're speaking about things like kidney or things like, I guess, spleen, that all of that is basically halal according to Shafi'i right there. And the evidence that they had used is that the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, أُحِلَّتْ لَنَا مَيْتَتَانِ وَدَمَانِ, that the Prophet ﷺ basically said the two types of maytatan, two types of dead animals are basically permissible for us to eat, and two bloods. Okay, so what do you mean two bloods? What two bloods? So this is maytatan, that the Prophet ﷺ explained that it was the locust and also the fish. Daman, the two bloods that are permissible are basically al-kabid wa al-tahal. Al-kabid basically is kidney, okay, or liver, and al-tahal basically the spleen, to consume, to eat, even though what we know for sure is that their color is red simply because of the blood that basically is congealed blood right there, or perhaps clotted blood right there. But then, even though it contains blood, but it would be permissible to consume. Okay, so here's the question. What if this wasn't clotted blood? Okay, this wasn't clotted blood. So we're right there trying to make our biryani, and we put the water, we probably, I know that, I guess for biryani, you first have to saute the meat and the onions and then the meat and etc. But let's say we split it, we switch it, okay? Let's just say we're trying to do something else. We're trying to do, I guess, get the broth out, okay? And what we're trying to do is that we put the meat, perhaps when you're doing biryani, because you're putting it in the onion, in the oil, you're probably not seeing the blood come out. But in water, you do get to see it. You get to see it, the blood right there. And in fact, you may put the meat inside the water and you can really see that blood coming out and all of that. Is that haram to consume or not? That's what I'm talking about. Well, if the blood is going to be there and we're going to be seeing it in water, then for sure it's there when we're cooking it in oil. Just because we happen to put cardamom and we happen to put all these different spices, it doesn't mean it's not there. We know it's there because, hey, even when you probably washed it, you were capable of seeing that blood basically there, and something that you basically could not deny the fact that even when you were washing it, that there were streaks of blood. Okay, is that haram? Two differences of opinions. The first one basically said that it was haram because it is part of this gushing blood, or at least, even if it wasn't necessarily gushing per se, but it was basically part of that blood. Okay, and said, hey, you cannot do an exception because the exception was exclusive to basically the liver or the kidney and basically the spleen, and does not include the blood in the flesh. The second opinion basically said, actually, it's not haram. So that meat that basically is not well done, and you could still see blood and making it juicy right there, they said, well, that's not haram. What's the evidence? They said, well, when you see daman masfuhan within this sentence, you could see that it basically had made it specific and strictly that the type of blood that is haram is basically the one that is masfuh, the one that is gushing blood. And al-Qurtubi wanted to say, and that's actually the preponderant. When he says وَهُوَ الصَّحِيحُ, meaning that is the preponderant opinion, and where is the evidence to support this interpretation? We can't just have an interpretation just like that, but we need an evidence. Let's see. He said, Umran ibn Hudayr, that's a narrator, he said, I asked Aba Mijlis عما يتلطخ من اللحم بالدم وعن القدر تعلوها الحمرة من الدم فقال لا بأس به إنما حرم الله المسفوح وقالت نحوه عائشة وغيرها وعليه إجماع العلماء. What does this mean? Okay, let's see. He said, I had asked Abu Mujlis. Now, just an idea, Abu Mujlis is basically one of the tabi'is, okay? And he actually met with a number of different Sahaba. So he was a tabi'i that met a number of different Sahaba, and here's what he had basically learned. He said, I had asked Abu Mujlis about what basically comes out of the meat and what we would see basically going up in our huge basically pots and all of that red and pinkish color that would be in our broth. And he said, there's nothing wrong with it. لا بأس به. لا بأس به meaning it's permissible. إنما حرم الله المسفوح. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid the gushing blood. And his Sayyidah Aisha said of a similar thing. And he said, and this is what scholars had unanimously agreed on. Okay, where did you get the agreement? And he said, well, you've got a Tabari right there. You got al-Muharrar al-Wajiz for Ibn Atiyah to help you basically see that there is a unanimous agreement. Ikramah said, well, who's Ikramah? Ikramah ibn Abi Jahl, basically. He said, if it wasn't for this ayah, then all of the Muslims would be basically going after the different veins, exactly like the way the Jews would do in order to make their meat, or at least their meat or their food basically considered a kosher or halal to consume. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, also a tabi'i, he said, there's nothing wrong with the blood that is in the veins, or even the word mukh does not mean brain. It does mean brain, but here il-mukh actually is talking about the blood that is in the spines, or basically deep inside also the bones. So when they're probably, maybe cooking the bones to get probably broth, or to get the gelatin, the collagen, all of that, that's basically al-mukh right there. And it basically is wanting to make sure that we understand this one. Let's just go over some of the names, because I don't want you just skipping all of that. I want you to see Abu Mijlis. Let's see right there. Who's Abu Mijlis, the guy that we just read about? Let's see. His name is Lahiq ibn Humayd. Lahiq ibn Humayd is basically one of the scholars, and plus he is a tabi'i. A tabi'i means he was one of those scholars that learned off the Sahaba. So he met the Sahaba. And who are those Sahaba that he had learned from? Mu'awiyah bin Abi Sufyan. You can't go farther than that. Abu Hamza, Anas ibn Malik. Yes, Anas ibn Malik, the Prophet ﷺ's personal assistant. That was also him. Samrat ibn Jundub, and Abdullah ibn Abbas was also his close teacher. Jundub ibn Abdullah al-Badri, we talked about him before. So just seeing those references basically helps us see these great scholars and what we learn from them. These great scholars are and certainly resources for us to learn our Islam. So that was a little bit about who, a little bit about Abu Mijlis. So just remember that. Let's see right there. Abu Mijlis, here we go. Al-Basri al-A'war. He was one-eyed. Okay, what happened to him? You could say that Sami'a min Ibn Abbas, Anas ibn Malik, etc. And Ayyub al-Sukhtiyani basically took from him, and some of those important names, and just wanted to at least mention him. Okay, the other name, So now we know that, hey, this is really close. He was basically learning all the way from Anas ibn Malik, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and certainly, very important Sahaba right there. Let's see, another name that was mentioned is Sayyidah Aisha mentioned the same, and Ikramah right there. Ikramah ibn Abi Jahl was one of those Sahaba, and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Let's just see Ibrahim al-Nakha'i really quick right there. This is, I believe, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i right there. Is that right? Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Okay, here we go. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i was originally from Yemen, but he lived in Iraq. Let's see, that was his name. And you could see he was born 50-year Hijrah. The Prophet ﷺ died 11-year Hijrah, and this guy was born 50-year Hijrah. So in other words, let's see who he had access to. Masruq ibn al-Ajda', Abdul Rahman ibn Yazid, Alqama. So let's say, some very important scholars right there, at least living in al-Kufa. Let's say for Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, just really quick, he basically had access tabi'i ra'a Aisha. Let's see. He had basically seen السيدة عائشة ودخل عليها ولم يثبت له منها سماع. But at least we don't have evidence that a chain of narration that takes us all the way back to her. But so now we know that he met these Sahaba right there. Okay. All right. I'm just going to, just let you see some of those. And certainly this website is a very important website that you can go to in order to learn about some of these figures. Okay. وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا كُلَّ ذِي ظُفُرٍ وَمِنَ الْبَقَرِ وَالْغَنَمِ حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ شُحُومَهُمَا إلا ما حملت ظهورهما أو الحوايا أو ما اختلط بعظم ذلك جزيناهم ببغيهم وإنا لصادقون. Okay, what does that mean? And upon those that had hadu. What is hadu? Hadu meaning the Yahud, meaning the Jews, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that he had forbidden upon the Jews everything that basically contained a hoof. And from the cows and sheep, there was an extra thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid upon them, which is basically the fat, and unless that was the fat that was carried on their backs, or basically the fat that surrounded certain areas basically around their GI system, basically, or any of the fat that would be mixed with bones. ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِبَغْيِهِمْ. They were basically punished because of their transgression. وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. And we are truthful in what we say. Okay, a couple items here. Number one, when we see al-Qurtubi, he said that there were 6 different matters here. A couple questions that al-Qurtubi is going to tackle in this ayah. Number one, and if you say ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِبَغْيِهِمْ, is every single ruling necessarily as a punishment? Or are there certain rulings that are not necessarily a punishment? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِبَغْيِهِمْ? That's question one. Question two is, if we look at this ayah and we are basically told that what is halal on the Yahud, that would basically be halal on us. Is that necessarily the case? So what if they basically regarded certain animals with hoofs or cud or chewed cud or whatever it is, that those animals were not permissible to consume? Does that mean that that piece within that animal is haram on us too? Or what does that mean? So those are some of the questions that al-Qurtubi wanted to discuss in that regards. And the other thing is that if this ayah is basically coming after قُلْ لَا أَجِدُ فِي مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ مُحَرَّمًا, why did it then get into speaking about the Yahud? How did we jump into speaking about the Yahud? So we're going to talk about that, inshallah. But right now, let's just answer some of those questions. ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِبَغْيِهِمْ. And how do we understand whenever we may have a ruling, how do we understand the piece that sometimes that the rulings and what they relate to in terms of halal, haram, and what actually makes the ruling that relates to all of the different rulings that happen, that basically happen to be part of Sharia. Does that mean every single ruling is necessarily a punishment? The answer is no. There are different kinds of, or different reasons to why certain items may be haram. Sometimes it's basically a test. Other times it basically is because it contains some harm. Other things may be basically as leading to harm. So let's see, give an example. So the first kind is basically what leads to harm. And if it leads to harm, then therefore it would be haram. So if it leads to harm to family, like zina, then that would basically corrupt the family, then that would be haram. If it leads to intoxication, like khamr, then therefore that would be haram. Anything that disrupts the, let's call it the stability within the deen, within the nafs, the aql, the ird, the mal, deen, and basically our own deen, to our own life, in human individual life or community life. 2 or 3, if it disrupts basically the mental health, and whether we're talking about intoxication or whether we're speaking about mental health and as what we would know psychological, let's call it basically affecting psychological health, then that would also be included. Number 4 is basically family and chastity, and number 5 is wealth. All of those different areas would basically involve the first type of why something might be haram. But not everything that is haram is necessarily haram because it leads to harm. Not everything. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically in the general ruling said, يُحِلُّ لَهُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَيُحَرِّمُ عَلَيْهُمُ الْخَبَائِثِ. He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically permits things that are healthy, that are good, الطيبات, and would forbid al-khaba'ith, would forbid things that would lead to harm. The other type of why something might be haram or obligatory is not necessarily relating to what it leads to, but, or at least in terms of a direct harm or a direct benefit, but sometimes it's only to bring about discipline. Keep that in mind. To bring about discipline. What do we mean by discipline? Well, discipline basically means 1, focus. Discipline. 2, can also mean to be on structure. 3, to basically be committed to a greater cause. So you're probably disciplined to go to school and attend school, etc., in order to be disciplined. By the time you get to a harder and a more advanced level, that you would be capable of being disciplined / learning how to focus, learning how to stay put in order to be capable of being up to the level of focus that is necessary to help you achieve the harder levels. That's one meaning of focus, basically, or discipline. So just like when we talk about wudu, it's to teach us how to stay disciplined as in hygiene, and certainly when we're speaking about perhaps putting in a limit to whom you can marry, who you cannot marry, or even perhaps wearing silk for men, or maybe in the beginning of Islamic legislature, not praying while one is drunk, all of that, it wasn't necessarily because of what harm it would lead to, as much as it was to bring about the discipline. Yet, other things, even in life, من استعجل الشيء قبل أوانه عوقب بحرمانه. Whoever rushes something before it is time for it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would punish them by taking it away. Like what? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the Bani Israel, because they had basically stalked and they had basically twisted or reinterpreted the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and committed all the haram, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished them by making extreme regulations and extreme legislation upon them because they were not being committed. And this is one very important thing to say. For children, when, for example, you keep on twisting, and sorry, ladies, but this is very common in women as well, I would say it, because they're not probably having that courage, bravery, whatever you want to use, to basically stand up and be straightforward in standing against perhaps a regulation mom might set or anything like that. They would find sneaky ways to get around the rule because they don't want to, they're afraid of the punishment. Versus boys, they're not afraid of the punishment. They'll be straight to have the audacity. This isn't good, but they'll be having the audacity to basically create a revolution and stand against the rules that you might want to put. But then what you end up putting more and more regulations because you're trying to basically prevent them from cutting corners. And that's the same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Bani Israel were continuously cutting corners, continuously basically twisting the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically made more and more regulations on them, just as in the ayah وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا كُلَّ ذِي ظُفَرٍ, just like in this ayah that we're dealing with right here. And in another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ الْبَقَرِ وَالْغَنَمِ حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ شُحُومَهُمَا. Why? He said, ذَلِكَ جَزَيْنَاهُمْ بِبَغْيِهِمْ. The reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid basically some of the things that are in cows or cattle or in sheep is basically because of what they had committed. Same thing. فَبِظُلْمٍ مِّنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another surah, in Surah An-Nisa, basically said, and as a result of what they had committed in terms of oppression, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically disciplined them or given them more restrictions because they continued to cut corners or find ways to sneak around the ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same thing when you're talking about the day on Saturday when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَيَوْمَ لَا يَسْبِتُونَ لَا تَأْتِيهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever it's a Saturday, they basically would not get the fish basically in large numbers, etc. So that's very important to keep in mind. If you try to attempt to cut corners and think that you're making things faster for you to get your rizq, expect things to go farther, not nearer. So if you think that by hanging out around guys that somehow you're going to get your rizq in finding the right spouse faster, you're making things harder. Don't cut corners. The second you cut corners, you will find yourself getting farther and farther from the halal rizq, from the halal tayyib. And if you thought that, yeah, I can rob a bank to probably get my rizq faster, guess what? You're going to make yourself get farther and farther and not nearer your rizq. And that's the same thing with everything. You try to cut corners and you're going to find yourself going farther. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had also mentioned in terms of man ista'jala shay'a qabla awanihi uqiba bihirmana. The scholars of fiqh, had basically said, whoever rushes in attempting to get something before it is the right time for them to get it in, then we would punish them by not giving it to them. And certainly we would see the different rulings, not only in legislation, but we would see it also in life. Once you try to get closer and you think you can cut corners and get to what you want, not until you do things right. And sometimes you need to discipline yourself and not rush your risk. And you have to just wait till your risk comes, even if you see it right there. Learn how to discipline by putting in the training of sabr. The key to discipline is sabr and sabr and sabr. Discipline involves 4 different elements. Number 1 is basically recognizing what you're being disciplined for. In other words, we're talking about the value. 2, having patience. 3, even if you may get the opportunity to probably cut corners, you have to have that satisfaction to stick with what is halal. And 5, that's what will bring in a disciplined person becomes the courageous person. So if you thought that by cutting corners that somehow you basically had proven to be brave, sorry, but you're nothing but a coward, and you cut corners and you are the first to basically see things snap in your face without you realizing. Islam wanted you to learn how to stay disciplined, whether people are watching or whether people are not watching, but you would stay connected with the value, with the principle, and you will see risk coming to you. Okay, we're going to end right there, inshallah, because I don't want to get to the other details right now. There's so much to say, but inshallah, tomorrow we'll be continuing with these 6 different questions that al-Qurtubi wanted to discuss in that regards. So stay tuned for tomorrow. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. So the sister is asking, is it related to a sifa? Yes, absolutely. It's related to sifa. A sifa is basically a person that does not recognize whether we're speaking about the value of what they have. So they might have money, but then not recognize the value and put it where it belongs. Any potential that the person doesn't recognize the value of it and they wander it and distribute it, or they wander it in a way that put it in where that potential does not belong, and that's safi. A safa is having the potential, either not recognizing it or recognizing it, but not putting it and channeling it in what would benefit the person. That's what a safa would be. Okay. So inshallah, if there are any questions, you can unmute yourselves and I'd be happy to basically answer the questions. MashaAllah, we've got a very good number right there, MashaAllah. If you don't want to be on basically on that recording,